Thanks so much for that. And I can see we've got Taiwo online there. And I believe we have just been joined by Islam. Is that correct? Hello. Hi. I didn't know you were going to make it. Lovely to see you. We just briefly, if you're all right to just do a very short introduction for anybody who might have visual impairments so we know what we're looking at. And then we'll get into Taiwo's presentation, if that's okay, Islam.
Sure. I'm short, a Black woman. I have braids on. Normally I have a very small afro. I have brown eyes and a very big smile. I hope that's sufficient.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks so much. Lovely to see you today, Islam. And if I could just pass over to, so we're just having 5-minute presentations from everybody, and then we'll have a very short discussion before we get into our break this afternoon. So Taiwo, if I could hand over to you for your lightning talk about our place in the world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thanks for those that have presented earlier before me. Great work that you're doing all over the world where you're coming from. Like I mentioned earlier on in my short presentation, I'm Taiwo. I'm wearing glasses. I'm a Black man from Nigeria. I'm currently residing in Regina, Treaty 4, in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. And then I'd like to deeply acknowledge that the land on which the University of Regina resides on is the homeland of the Mischief Nation, and it also belongs to the Nakota, the Lakota, Dakota nations. My connection to the land is critical in the sense that as someone who came from Nigeria to Canada over 6 years ago, and really thinking about the impact of colonization and how we were trained not to even speak in our language, always thinking about Englishifying us and all of those ways of extracting and disconnecting us from our identities. It's the same history that was perpetrated here in Canada with the residential school system and all of those things. And that brings me to my talk today, very short presentation, to really ask myself the question, what's our role? I'm a theater maker. I go to community to do work with different stakeholders, depending on the kind of issues that is of importance to them. And one of the critical reasons why issues around climate change and sustainability is of importance to me is obviously not just because of where I'm situated, but beyond that is the impact of climate to our world today. And with that, I also want to just share my empathy with the current flooding happening in Nigeria now that has affected over 1.4 million people. And of course, to other part of the world that is experiencing such horrendous impact of the climate. As a theater maker, part of the piece for me is really questioning not just only what we're doing, but how we're doing what we're doing. And so I feel that part of our role is to think local, to think globally, but to act locally and individually. And thanks to those that are presented before me, because some of the projects that they've highlighted are various individual ways that they are engaging with some of these issues. I've worked in over 14 countries across 4 continents, and my current work focuses on part of my current work focuses on issues around policing. It focuses around issues of climate, particularly on the prairies here in Canada, and that's because the prairies, as a geography in Canada, is one of the spaces where there's a lot of agriculture happening, and currently we see that there's huge impact of drought happening to this region. And so each time, the critical question in going to community has always been, what's the ethics of working with people as I engage with them? How do I start thinking about the issues around social justice, issues around power, impact of colonization? How do those things, power shift, power change, resource sharing, how do those issues ultimately end up affecting where we are right now? So my offering this in this morning is to challenge us to think, how can we think globally but acting locally and individually? And I like to stretch that a little bit to now go further by saying, what's the ethics of the things that we're doing locally and individually? Because if we constantly do things in amazing programming that we're doing, but we don't think about the approaches and the ways in which we're doing it, if we don't think about participation in a true sense, if we don't think about how this the power that we're all entangled in, if we don't think about dominance, if we don't think about racism and every other things that are in between, then the true sense of the change we truly desire may really not be holistic. And so for me as a theater maker in my work, I am constantly challenging myself and allowing the community, working alongside community, to ask those questions. How can I think globally but act locally and individually? I'll end my thought here, and I really look forward to the conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Taiwo. There's plenty to be thinking on and discussing there. And now for the last of our panelists, if I could just ask Islam to share the 5 minutes of thoughts about our place in the world.
Thank you so much. And I'd really sincerely apologize. I've messed up the time and I only realized when I joined the session. So my extreme apologies. And when I think about, first of all, I'm a bass player. I also work in the deliberative democracy space and culture as a way of activism, and also to ensure participation in our everyday life and everything that we do. So when I think about our place in the world, it's hard for me to imagine that, again, like on what like the previous person said, like how could we really ensure that there is participation at the roots of what we do in the lives that we live. I work for the Innovation for Policy Foundation, and the Innovation for Policy Foundation has created tools and methodologies to develop and to support in deliberative and participatory policy reform and co-creation. And to be honest, like just seeing around our continent that it is very possible that we can ensure that people are included in everyday important decisions, especially at a governance level. And when it comes to art, I feel like there's no way we could truly engage our communities without using art as the medium to do so. Without art, we're not able to communicate with each other. I feel like this is the only medium that allows us to truly have an open conversation, to truly be able to listen to each other, to truly be able to make sure that we're being inclusive in the work that we do. And again, of course, you cannot not think about racism and not think about all the issues that are going on in like development and how that plays when we want to create a better world for ourselves and for our people. So where we are right now is not very pretty, but I'm extremely excited and hopeful, especially hearing just a little bit about what everyone has been up to and where we're going. It gives me a lot of sense of security and feeling that there is a possibility to do it, because there's so many people who are trying and who are working and who are doing incredible work, but we just also need to be able to come together and work, because we're dealing with an extremely dangerous situation in our hands right now. And if we fail to come together as a community, as people, as artists, as policymakers, as governments, and work together and really put our interests and the interest of our communities first and foremost, then I think we have a pretty good chance of surviving. So yeah, again, I'm just really sorry for coming so late. And yeah, I just feel pretty much out of place right now. But yeah, so let's continue working together. Let's continue ensuring that we are including every single voice that we can include, which is every single voice in the decisions that we're making, and that we need to go way above and beyond the normal channels of communication, the normal ways of outreach, the normal ways of advocacy. We need to look way beyond that and be truly innovative, and not have this innovation theater where we say we're innovative, but we're not really thinking about how are we doing this? How are we challenging our own preset ideas of how development needs to be, or how inclusivity needs to happen. So I'll just close off with that. And thank you so much again for hosting me and for allowing me to join so late. I'm really embarrassed, but I'm very grateful to also be with you guys.
Nothing to be embarrassed or be ashamed for, because you're dialing in from somewhere else at the moment now, aren't you? Whereabouts are you based, Islam?
So I'm from Sudan, from Khartoum. I'm currently in Nairobi, and I got here 2 days ago, which kind of why messed up my my time zone. Oh, so now when my brother hears all the way in Canada, I'm like, oh my God, how could I do that after 2 years of working remotely?
Yeah. It happens, but we're really grateful for you to be here now. So, Charisse, you just mentioned something to me before, though. How much more time have we got in our... Yes. Okay. Oh, no. Thrilling moment. I hope everyone's having a sort of... Sorry? We've got an extra 10 minutes, so we were due to finish this session at 3:05, but we're going to finish at 3:15 so that we actually have some time for some discussion, have some time for some feedback and reflections and thoughts. And I'm looking at all of you people because you're here in the room as well. It's not a one-way thing here. It's not that. But I was just, I think taking a moment for all of those brilliant presentations to sort of wash over me, and also thinking about the questions that people posed in them. And so it's not necessarily the questions that kind of had to think of it, because the first thing that came to my mind that was a question that Helen had here: why would underrepresented groups want to engage with palaces of privilege and power? I think was the way that you put it, and that's a really, that's a question we could dig into right now. And then also thinking of Taiwo's question, like how do you go about thinking globally and acting locally? So those are two questions there that I just kind of had first of all in my mind. But actually what I'd like to do now before we get into those is just give a couple of seconds to see if there's anything that's kind of come up for you as we've been hearing from each other, because I guess that's the first time you've also heard from each other in that. Is there anything that you wanted to comment on, or any thoughts that have occurred for you for that? And also I am still checking Slido, so anybody who's watching online or in the room who doesn't want to voice up, we've got a couple of roving mics there. So yes, I'll just give a couple of moments to see if there's any further thoughts from the panel before I'll ask some questions.
Just a really quick one. At the event on Saturday, somebody said, we're living in somebody else's house, mm-hmm. and what if we get kicked out, and what, we have to be really sensitive, all of that sort of stuff. And I was comparing the event, and I said, no. We're not living in somebody else's house. This is my house. This is your house. You have to make demands. You have to feel at home. My ashes are going to be scattered here. My children's lives are here. So I think that tendency that somehow we're living as guests, we are not. This is our place.
I guess the thing that I'd like to see, which I've been thinking from all these talks, is to speak from the Indigenous perspective, and just to say that climate change has happened before, and we've survived, and I feel really very hopeful. I think for me the key word in all of this is personhood. How do we really root ourselves into the concept of personhood, which was the doctrine under which we were enslaved, was that we did not have personhood, but how can we understand that trees have personhood, rivers have personhood, the planet has personhood, and if we can just get that one thought to embed itself, then I think everything would just open up.
Then we would be able to think globally and act locally, because we've got our sense of personhood. Sorry, Taiwo, we've got an answer to your question there. Sorry, just give you Taiwo, Islam, Jess, if there's any thoughts that have bubbled up for you while we've been having the conversation.
Yeah, I guess also, is there a mic? Okay, all right. Well, for me, what ties a lot of this together is, where does our motivation come from? And it's both local and global for me. And it's, where do we get, for me, my fuel is, as I mentioned, a sense of care. I feel like we act for the things that we care about, and we care about the things that we feel connected to. And so how do we, regain that connection? And I feel like so much of that, gets lost in, I'm not going to go into all the things it does, but it gets lost. And we all have a heart here, and we're all here I'm here because there's something in there that's really hurting and that needs to tackle this. So I feel like that's local and global for me, and I know that it's not, well, maybe it's easier for me to say because I'm here, but I don't know, for me it's really at the root of a lot of what we're talking about.
That's great. And I'll just give a moment for Taiwo and Islam if there's anything you want to add in here. And I really want to hear from people in the room. Somebody's got something to say, haven't you? Okay, brilliant. There's a couple over there. And I also have something on Slido. God, I've got so plethora of riches. So Taiwo, Islam, is there anything that's come up for you from hearing? And then I'll do Slido and hand over to people over there.
Well, I think I just wanted to respond to one of the questions about why marginalized communities, why involve them in the and I love how it was temple of power and privilege. I think that's the question, right?
I would under-resource communities and get palaces of privilege and power. Palaces of privilege and power, isn't that like, oh?
It's amazing. I love the crafting, and my response is why not, right? And that's because when we reshift that question to think about beyond the power dynamics, the stratification of the have and the have not, knowing that there is a connection there. The places and palaces of power and privilege, they were made by the so-called underserved, right? Whether historically, and we know we know all of the labors that go into building a lot of these railways, a lot of the systems that we have that capitalism built on, and all of that. My question is, why not? Because the reality is that as long as the power, the resources still remains with a set of people, the shift will never happen. So why not bring everybody in? Why not bring multiple centers into making bigger centers, right? And I think that's a beautiful question that I'm offering, that why not? Especially knowing where we're historically where we're at, and hopefully that can help us to think about the preferred future that we want, where there is justice and equity. End of thought.
Thank you. Yeah, we got a bit cross talking over each other there. I'm sorry about that, Taiwo. Islam, is there anything you want to add? Or I've got a question here on Slido, which is actually real. It's a real banger. And then there's a couple of people in the room as well who've got some thoughts to share.
I really believe that power needs to be distributed in radically more inclusive ways. It needs to really be activating our collective intelligence and wisdom, and just to see how we're going to address all these shared challenges that we have. I think it's extremely difficult to say that we cannot include people for whatever reason. It makes no sense. We need to radically change the way power the power dynamics are in the world right now. I'm really tired of us having to suffer for, the West and their excessive use of, fossil fuels and whatever. And then we're always the one that we're hurting the most, right? So I think for me, that's it. Let's reimagine how we're running our this earth, right? Let's reimagine how we are talking to each other. Let's give Indigenous people their rights, because they're also the owner land and they know best on how to tackle things. So definitely, let's be more inclusive in the work that we do.
Brilliant. There's loads of great questions coming through on Slido now, and just worried that we won't have time to get through all of them. So I just want to first share a reflection that someone's posted, which is really nice, saying thank you to the panel for your insights. You've given us a lot to think about, and I'll thank you at the end, but that's in there. The first question that came through, and anybody can answer this, just jump in when you've got the thoughts. Can you help to untangle the I and the collective we when it comes to art and climate justice? What's the interrelation? Is the I ethical in climate justice? Where's the space for the individual within the collective? It's yeah.
Really brief about this. Look, we as individuals, we can't change the world. The world has to be changed by we. However, individuals throughout history, although they operate within the context of history, individuals throughout history have made a difference by coming up with views, by coming up with perspectives, by contributing to discussion, to philosophy, to ideas, etc., which others then latch onto and others then amplify. So I don't think there is any contradiction between the I and the we. However, I can be a real ego problem.
I'd like to say quickly to that I absolutely worship the work of the Jamaican philosopher Sylvia Wynter. She is who I look to. I consider my work almost like a duty to her thinking. So in terms of the we and the I, we come from a huge legacy of amazing people that we can pull on and look towards in this journey that we are on as individuals, and it's a we journey.
So when I asked if anybody in the room had thoughts or things to share, I think you wrote, should we hear from both of you? You can share a mic within you, and
Hi, thank you so much, panellists. I thought I would get your thoughts on a question that my organisation are live trying to figure out right now, which is my organisation, we're a cultural organisation from Bristol, which has a big radical history of protest, but we're also a charitable organisation, which means we have limitations from the government on what we can talk about. And we're kind of asking now, how can cultural organisations, institutions and businesses with these limitations be more active in being in protest, in supporting movements and kind of redistributing that power, as the panel were talking about?
It's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah. Hiya, I'm Danielle, and thanks so much for your talks. They're amazing, and the work that you do is fantastic. I've seen your exhibition; it's brilliant. So I've had to write it down because. So how, as established and emerging climate activists, do we balance the necessity for the kind of deep thinking around motivation, ethics, purpose, mission, values, and cultivating inclusion and care with actually wanting to just get on and do? And what practical ways can each of you recommend for doing that kind of deep thinking as well as acting?
Yeah, so sort of how do you operate within a constrained, not just funding model, but everything that comes with it? And how do you balance all of the things that you want to do with just getting on with it? Does anyone want to go first? Or Taiwo, yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, I'm just going to be very quick on both questions, and I think both questions, we could spend a lot of the whole day on them. So the second question, I think you can't give what you don't have. That's my personal belief. I think that taking time to rest. So speaking of practicality, taking time to rest, knowing that you can't work all by yourself, having really deep partnership and collaboration in its true sense of responsibility and respect of the other, having a project and finding ways to co-design, collaborate with people. I think those are ways that I do a lot of the works that I do. And it's very refreshing because we don't have 100% energy all the time, where we can feed and piggyback on one another. And there are other practical ways around that. But one of the things that as artists that I think constantly need to tell ourselves is rest. We need to rest. We need to rest. End of thought on that. I'll move on to the first question, which is around how can an organization that is sort of in a liminal space, as you were, a charitable organization, and at the same time, with a history of protest, how can you work? And again, I'm answering this question knowing fully well that I don't have all the big pictures, so having bigger picture is always helpful. But I would say that I think that it's about reimagining strategies and tactics, right? Maybe back in the day, historically, the organization has been at the forefront. But now that things are beginning to change or it's shifted based on the status, are there ways that we can actually piggyback on what others are doing who are known and that's part of their mandate, right? And again, I said I'm not answering all of that out of full picture, but I think it's about tactics and strategy and going back to re-engineer that in meaningful and collective ways. End of thought.
Thank you, Taiwo, also for always saying end of thought, that we know where we're passing on. Has anyone else got any thoughts about that, how you balance? Yeah.
Miss Mouthy. Thank you both for your questions. I'd like to say for question number one, I think the real issue that you have is you can protest in a non-violent way. So you can be sneaky with your tactics, right? And you really see how with gay rights, and their amazing parades, they really shifted things, but there was absolutely no excuse given to shut them down. So I think tactics are really important. I think artists are wonderful at coming up with metaphors which allow you to speak about difficult things without speaking about difficult things. With your question, I would say, and again with this conference, I always have a joke that I'm into fellowship, not leadership. And with the bioscope, I was following the thinking of Canary, and I really wanted to make something that people could engage with that was not plastic. It was really as simple as that. It's like, why, we've got computers and headsets and all of these things. How can we make something that people can engage with that's sophisticated and technological, but you can throw into a forest and it will not damage the forest? So in that way, finding Canary's project and following her thinking and really helping her to enable her vision was at the root of this project, which is about moving the arts from temples to the people to back again. And so I'd also like to say the bioscope was in the temple, but it can be wheeled onto the side of any street and enjoyed. So breaking these these barriers between these colonial buildings, like literally making them permeable, is something. But yeah, fellowship.
We've got 2 minutes. One more question. Sorry, just this one question, which has kind of intrigued me and put in there and made me realise that actually in this conversation I've been thinking much about kind of urban settings and rural things. So when you were talking about nature, it kind of made me think about that. It's a very practical-based question. How do we mobilise when we're coming from rural communities living directly with the effects of climate crisis, but also social isolation and deprivation? So how do you start mobilising in a place where people are quite isolated and sparse? Sorry, it seems quite a full-on question to do that. Like, how do you go out and meet people? So anyone would like to jump into that question and see where we're going? Someone from Istanbul, the biggest city.
Yeah. Oh no, I've lost my thought. Yeah, I don't actually have an answer to that, but I just want to highlight that I do feel like loneliness and a sense of loneliness in this crisis is really a huge barrier to taking action. And yeah, just bringing a little bit more light to that and what we can do. I mean, connection is the opposite of that, but what we can do to get ourselves unstuck from that place. So it's not an answer, but maybe more highlighting what's there.
Yeah. That's great. And Islam, did you want to speak to that as well? And Taiwo?
Definitely. I wanted to share briefly the experience of the Sudanese revolution. I wish I came early so that I could share with you this incredibly powerful movement that it's been 3 years now, going into 4, of peaceful protesting. And the one thing that we noticed when there was an issue with mobilization, how are we engaging people in rural areas with no access to all the content that we're sharing on social media when we're mobilizing for our protests? And to be honest, it was a snowball. And that when people have reached such a point of being tired, then they just come and they move. You know, they're unstoppable because you've been oppressing them for so long, you've been taking from them for so long, and you know, enough. So I definitely encourage you all to read about the Sudanese revolution. There's a lot of things to read about it online. And the other thing for mobilization, before I end my thought, is citizen assemblies. And I think that's a great way to mobilize and push through our collective intelligence and end of thought.
Thank you. Taiwo, last thought, please.
Just quickly, I love the power of storytelling. I believe that whether individual storytelling or the collective stories, I think it has a lot of power, whether for someone in isolation or someone connected to another person. And I think we can, you know, part of the ways to mobilize is to harness storytelling. Stories are powerful. They are very, very important tools to actually make us connect together, even if we don't see ourselves physically. And I believe that, you know, for all of the protests and all of the great stuff that has happened in the past, in history, storytelling becomes very critical. In fact, that's why a lot of the military government will always clamp down that stories don't go out. Because the moment one story goes out, it inspires others. I'll leave it at that. And thank you for listening to us today. End of thought.
Well, I think we're out of time just now, aren't we, Cherise? So I just hope you could all join with me in thanking our brilliant panel today, Raj Pal, Helen Starr, Jessica Sim, Islam Afdiable, and Taiwo Afolabi. Thank you all so much for sharing your thought today.
Thank you. Really quickly, we're going to go into a very short break, 10 minutes, and just stretch, reflect, get to know some people, whatever you need to do, move to a next room. We're going to return at 25 after.